All right. We are recording. Good morning. Welcome to the RDRR Bidding Enhancements Track 2 training. My name is Cynthia Hinman, and I'm here with Mo Monetry and my subject matter experts for RDRR to bring you this training today. Mo is going to be monitoring the chat and looking for raised hands, and she'll let me know if there are any questions. If you need anything, if you're having any difficulties, you can chat with Mo directly. The SMEs are going to help me if there's any questions that I can't answer. So as I mentioned, the session's being recorded. The presentation and the recording will be posted on the website. The presentation may already be there. If not, it should be there today, and I'll get the recording up as soon as I have it available. So why don't we begin? As usual, we've got our housekeeping rules, which a lot of you are probably familiar with. Please keep yourself muted unless you have a question. And if you do have a question, you have a couple options. You can either raise your hand and we will call on you to ask your question verbally, or you can type it up in the chat and then I'll have Mo read it to me when we have a break for questions. And we will have breaks for questions throughout the session. So here's what I plan to cover today. First, we're going to cover the background of the RDR project, what we've accomplished so far, and what will be included in the current initiative. Next, I'm going to jump into a new procedure aimed at addressing the infeasible dispatch situation, and I'm going to define what that means and review what's changing. In the third section, we're going to be talking about requesting an exemption for discrete RDRRs over 100 megawatts. You'll learn why an SC might want to do that and the request process if you want to ask for that for your resource. We'll go over the market sim scenario together. There's one scenario, and then we'll wrap up with a list of action items. And then I'll stop for final questions, and then we will be done. So the timing for each section here is an estimate. Some parts might be longer or shorter, depending on the amount of questions that we get. So let's start with the background. So what is RDRR and where did it come from? So RDRR stands for Reliability Demand Response Resource. It was developed as a result of a CPUC decision where investor-owned utilities were required to transition their emergency triggered demand response programs to an ISO reliability demand response product. This new product compensated these resources to be the first load shed when the ISO was in an emergency and had exhausted supply, and would otherwise have directed distribution companies to shed load that had neither chosen to do that and didn't receive compensation for it. So you'll see the last bullet there talks about this program is triggered when there is an EEA2 declaration. In the past, you may have heard about our AWE program, meaning alerts, warnings, and emergencies. In May of this year, we transitioned from that AWE program to NERC's Energy Emergency Alert, or EEA system. When there is an EEA2, our RDRR program kicks into gear. There's more information about EEA stages, and there's a link on the bottom of the page. So in 2022, we initiated some enhancements to the RDRR bidding rules. First, the RDRR Bidding Enhancements Track 1 was used to align the RDRR bidding rules with real-time price conditions consistent with FERC Order 831. And it had to do with situations where the bid cap increased from $1,000 to $2,000. And the production date for that was June in 2022. If you want more information about Track 1, you can look on our website. Again, there's a link at the bottom of the page. With Track 2, we're going to be addressing the infeasible dispatch situation, and it also raises the discrete dispatch option to for the 100 megawatt limit, and that's scheduled for production on November 1st. Again, we will go into what those two things really mean in the coming slides. All right. So what will change with Track 2? So effective 11/1, there's going to be two changes. The first change ensures that RDRRs that use discrete dispatch option will have a feasible dispatch. And we will do that with something called a Pmin re-rate. Next, we'll discuss increasing the registration cap for discrete RDRRs to allow larger resources to choose that option. So what do I mean by discrete? Make sure we're on the same page about what that means. So there's two kinds of dispatch options for RDRRs. The first is discrete. These types of resources can be dispatched to their Pmax and Pmin only. They can't be dispatched up and down within the hour. Discrete resources only participate in the real-time market and not in day ahead. The tariff filing refers to them as all or nothing resources. So that's the graphic on the left side. Continuous dispatch resources, on the other hand, they're also known as having a marginal dispatch option. And they have more flexibility and are able to move up and down within the hour. These resources participate in day ahead and real time. Discrete and continuous designations are found in the master file. They can be changed once per season per 6-month period, meaning summer or winter. You could change the option that you choose for your resource. In today's training, we're going to be focusing on changes for discrete RDRRs, including the Pmin re-rate and increasing that registration cap, as I mentioned. So next, we're going to discuss what we mean by Pmin re-rate, but first I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions at this point. Mo, anybody have a hand raised, or are there any questions?
No questions so far. I do not see any hand raises or any items in the chat box. Again, if you'd like to ask any questions, please feel free to go ahead and add them to the chat box or raise your hand. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you, Mo. Okay, so now let's talk about what we mean by a Pmin re-rate. So let's start with an example. So I'm gonna tell you a little story here first, and then I will bring up the graphic on the screen. So we'll start with an example. An SC has a group of demand response resources that they would like to bid into the ISO market for emergency use only. They register the resource as a discrete RDRR, meaning that their bid will only have one bid segment, meaning 1 megawatt value for the entire hour, as opposed to operating anywhere between the Pmin and Pmax. They also let the ISO know that they can only be dispatched a maximum of once per day and a maximum daily runtime of 5 hours. Their Pmin is 0, like all RDRRs, and their Pmax in this situation is 10 megawatts. One day, the weather is extremely hot throughout the balancing authority area, and the ISO finds itself in an EEA2, meaning that the RDRR bids are now available for dispatch. The SC submits bids for hours 14 through 21 for 6 megawatts at $950. So you can see, as with those bids, this is what was awarded. The ISO dispatches this unit to 6 megawatts in hour 16, 0 megawatts in hour 17, 6 megawatts in hour 18, 0 megawatts in hour 19, and 6 megawatts in hour 20. Because it is a discrete dispatch, it's all or nothing, as I mentioned before, and this is how it looks, how it was dispatched. So keep in mind that the ISO considers 0 megawatt dispatch as being online. So it appears that it's respecting the 5-hour runtime. Because this is viewed as a shutdown, this dispatch is infeasible for the RDRRs. So as you can see, this could be a problem for our discrete dispatch resources. So with our Track 2 initiative, we are going to implement the RDRR Pmin re-rate. So let's see how that's going to work. So you can see this is a smaller picture of what I just showed you. So the main component of the RDRR2 Track 2 initiative is that now the ISO will re-rate the Pmin to a level just below the Pmax. Now this chart shows how the resource might be dispatched once RDRR Track 2 is implemented. In hours 17 and 19, the resource will be dispatched to 5.9 megawatts instead of 0. So it's re-rating the resource in those 2 hours. Instead of 0, it's 5.9. This means that the RDRR resources will also have minimum load costs. Consequently, these resources could be eligible to receive bid cost recovery for these costs. So although BCR is not a new feature in this particular initiative, let me just show you how that might happen. First, let's see the cost of the minimum load for hour ending 17. The minimum load cost is the bid price multiplied by the re-rated Pmin. So they bid in $950, which is 10% of the bid cap, times the re-rated Pmin of 5.9. So in that particular hour, the minimum load cost was $5,605. Now, if the costs exceeded the revenues over the entire day, just like all bid cost recovery, they could be eligible for recovering those costs in Charge Code 6620. So that is the Pmin re-rate. Are there any questions about that before I move on to the size limit change? Mo?
Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hands or add them in the chat session. I do not see any questions from our customers today. There might be some clarification, Anja, if you'd like to. Thank you.
Sure. So maybe just one clarification. The Pmin re-rate is just below the resource's upper economic limit. So what that bid was, it'll re-rate it to just below what that upper economic limit was. Just wanted to add that clarification. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Anya. All right, let's move along and talk about the exemption from the 100 megawatt limit. So today, only RDRRs that are 50 megawatts or less are allowed to choose the discrete option. In this initiative, we're going to increase that cap to 100 megawatts and allow certain resources that are larger than 100 megawatts to elect the discrete option. This section will cover which resources might be available for this exemption and how to request it. So if you're saying to yourself, I need the discrete dispatch option, but my resource is larger than 100 megawatts, what do I do? Well, first, your RDRR must meet the 3 criteria that are required for this exemption, which, as you can see there, the RDRR is located at a single site. The RDRR's underlying load cannot safely or operationally split and the RDRR is unable to operate continuously based on the source of the load providing curtailment. A good example of a resource that might fit into this category is a large industrial load that's at a single site and it can't split up its industrial processes. A resource like a battery farm may not be a good fit because its units can probably be split up and it would likely be able to be a continuous resource rather than requiring that discrete dispatch option. If you have questions about your unit, submit a city ticket and we can help you out with that. If your RDRR meets all those criteria, the next step is to request an exemption. You can do this by submitting a city ticket with the subject line demand response attestation. It's important that you put that in the subject line so that it gets routed to the correct people. Attachment H of the demand response BPM contains a template with the recommended wording, and we're going to look at that on the next slide. The draft BPM language is available for your review. We'll look at the wording on the next slide, as I just mentioned. I want to note that it says here that this request will come from the demand response provider. If the demand response provider does not have access to City, they can request access to City or work with their scheduling coordinator to submit that request. So then the ISO will get that request, and if they approve it, they're going to update the master file for that particular resource. The city ticket will then be closed, and then that resource will be able to use the discrete dispatch option. I give it 10 days for approval. So let's look at that attachment H. This is the suggested wording that we have. You can see here it says I with the knowledge and experience. So you've got a person, their title, their department, and they are requesting a new registration above 100 megawatts for a particular resource, or they may be increasing an existing RDRR from below 100 to above 100. The third option is that it could be an increase by 50 megawatts or greater to a previously approved RDRR value that's already at 100 megawatts. And so you would then, if it's 100 megawatts or more and it's increasing by 50 megawatts or more, you're going to want to submit one of these requests. And it also allows you to submit an attached Excel file if you have more than one resource. The person who is sending this is also attesting to the fact that they meet all three criteria, and then there is a signature or the name and title. And then it's sent via city ticket to the ISO. Are there any questions about this or any comments that any of the SMEs would like to add?
Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hands, and also you have the option to add your comments in the chat box. Cindy, I do not see any questions at this time.
Hello, this is Elaine. I'd like to make a comment. So I just want to make it clear that while we are approving it and making changes in the master file, the only thing that we're making a change to in the master file is to note the exception of going over 100 megawatts. It's still on the DRP or SC's responsibility to go into the master file and update the value from, 100 to 150 or whatever it might be. And you can do that for an RDRR change.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Looks like Alan Wong has a question. No, can you, Alan, are you available?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I wasn't sure if I was waiting to be unmuted. A question on the exemption criteria. Can you define site? I want to make sure at least our understanding of a single site, what that means, and also defining what safely or operationally, like what that to the CAISO what that exactly means. Just some clarification there.
Elaine or Anya, can you help me out with that?
I believe that we have some language in the tariff regarding the site location when it comes to demand response resources, as demand response cannot be registered at multiple sites. I'll have to look into language around safely or operationally split, but that's something that we will likely rely on the resource to indicate, their determination of safely or operationally. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya.
Okay, thanks for that, Anya. And just the restriction to a single site, what is sort of the risk that may pose to the market if it's, say, 2 sites or 3 sites, if we're talking about customer locations, I guess? Because I think in reading the CAISO's final proposal, if the Pmin re-rate were to go in, I think that kind of alleviates some of the concerns of the pricing run and scheduling run by using the Pmin re-rate that seemed to have kind of addressed some of the CAISO's concerns.
Sure, Alan. I think the thinking there was if they're located at multiple sites, they can be split. I think having large numbers of blocky resources in the CAISO's market is not operationally efficient, and so we are looking to resources to split them where possible.
Okay, yeah, perhaps we can follow up more, because I think, looking at this as a whole, that, could result in more resource IDs being created and hence more resources to manage under emergency conditions, whether it be for exceptional dispatch or market dispatch. So just wanted to comment there, and I think we'll follow up on the city and perhaps with some of the folks on the call. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Appreciate the question. Any other questions?
I do not see any other hands raised or any questions in the chat box, Cindy. Back to you.
Thanks, Mel. All right. So there is one market sim scenario. I'm going to first go over the important dates. So the deadline to request participation in the market sim was August 12th. Things are getting moved out, and if you want to participate, just get that request in as soon as possible, and you would send that request to marketsim@caiso.com. The connectivity started on August 22nd, and the current date that I have for the market simulation scenario for RDRR is September 29th, 2022. So here is the market sim scenario. If you go on our website to look at it, this is what you will see. The description of it is to submit competitive bids by those discrete RDRRs. And the ISO operators are going to declare a stage 2 emergency, so you can submit those bids. And then the expected outcome is that the systems resulting from your awards will have the right information. So on my next slide, I'm going to give you some suggestions about what you might want to look at. So you're going to want to submit your bids. And again, as those of you who have RDRRs know, you're going to submit bids that are within 95% to 100% of the bid cap, which is $1,000 in this example, in this scenario. The awarded resources, you should validate your market outcomes in ADS, validate that dispatch information. You're going to look in CMRI. You probably want to look and see your real-time dispatch schedules in that table. You can look at expected energy and ISO commitment cost details. So those are my recommendations. There may be other places that you want to check out. And I'm going to stop again for questions, and then we'll do our wrap-up.
Thank you, Cindy. I'm looking at our box and I do not see any questions in the chat nor any hand raised. But I also want to check with our SMEs to see if they have any clarifications they'd like to add, if any.
It looks like Ray has a question.
Thank you, Ray. Go ahead and ask your question, please.
Thank you to you both. I just want to know, have we decided, or has CAISO decided on when the hours will be for the declaration of the EEA2s for the trade date?
Yeah, I have not heard that, but is Ansherman on the phone or anybody else on the team that could answer that question?
Working with our team.
I would say, why don't, you know, I'm sure we will go over that in the Market Sim meetings once that's established, so you can stay tuned for that.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. Anything else?
No further questions.
All right, well, I just have one other short thing to go through in our wrap-up. A list of action items of things that you may or should do. Submit an attestation via city if you have one of those resources that's over 100 megawatts and you want the discrete option and you meet the criteria. Register for the Market Sim if you want to participate and do that as soon as possible. Review that Market Sim scenario, make sure you understand it. Participate in the Market Sim. And if you have any questions, participate in those Market Sim meetings. If you can also submit a city ticket with your questions. And if you do, please put in the functional environment, Market Simulation Fall 2022. Any questions about the action items or anything in this presentation? All right, well, I thank everyone for attending, and we will be sending out a short course evaluation, and if you would fill that out, it would be really helpful so we can tailor our training for you and give you what you need. Anyway, have a great day and try to stay cool. I will talk to you all on our next training. Thank you. Bye.